like to introduce them to you. So if you could just do a quick introduction of your names, and then Sam will hand it to you to start the fireside chat.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks again for being here. My name is Ben Drew. I'm an analyst at the Act-Iac group.
Thank you. Going around with the rest of our group, my name is Sam Walters, and I'm going to go ahead and get us started today. I know we're going to run a little short on time, and we hope to cover a lot of different aspects of digital ID and what it means and some of the implementations of it. We also really want to hit on some of the technologies and just get a general understanding of how we can use it and what they mean for government and all of the different uses around that. So we brought in an expert today in that field, and as well as one of my colleagues, Christopher Laverne, who has a vast experience in the government contracting space and is the VP of Consulting Services over at CGI. So first, I'll pass it over to Justin. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good to meet you. Thanks for being here. Justin Legary, Director of Solutions Architect over at Idemia. It's a global digital identity and physical identity company. I'll go more into that later. But previously, before that, I was actually at a federal employee in national security space at FEMA and USCIS. So looking forward to talking with y'all.
And then, Chris, could you give us a brief introduction about you?
Other than what you just said, sure. I had a long time in the field. Certainly touch on digital IDs and identities as part of the ICAM space and other involvements there in the government. So we'll see where this all goes.
Great. Well, to kick us off today, I guess we'll pass the first question over to Justin. So Justin, just a couple quick questions off the top. The first one that we have is, what really is a digital ID? And I think we hear about it a lot, and to different people, it means different things. I've had some conversations with some of my colleagues, and there isn't one clear definition. So to you, what would a digital ID be?
Yeah, great question, and we get that quite a bit. The basics of a identification card are some type of a credential, right? Allows an individual to prove attributes of themselves in different forms or factors. And so digital ID is beyond just taking a picture of your driver's license or passport and saying, hey, here's it's digitally. There really is kind of a transaction aspect that goes along with it, right? So being able to create a credential that has specific attributes, allowing you to share those attributes to different relying parties or to different groups of people, and then being able to ensure a transaction against those two parties are who they say they are. So.
Now, Chris, as we're talking about digital IDs, we said different people have different definitions. So it sounds like Justin kind of hit the nail on the head. But for you, would you say there's any differences there? Is there anything that you would consider a digital ID that maybe Justin didn't touch on?
No, Justin hit it pretty well. I mean, it's really, those two kind of factors, right? The trust that the identity of that person is who they say they are, right? And then the trust in the security of that transaction, right? So you've got your digital authenticators and your digital ID, and together you create that trust so that you can do these transactions.
And so now my next question will come, and Chris, we'll come back to you on this one. What are some of the benefits of having a digital ID versus a identification such as your driver's license? Why does making it digital? What are the pros there?
Sure. Well, one would be doing online transactions, right? And situations where I'm not directly in front of you. So, I mean, if I've got my driver's license and I can show that to somebody and go somewhere, or a passport or any other kind of physical government identity, somebody can touch it and feel it and have all that wonderment and decide that they accept that source, right? The U.S. government or a state government ID. Whereas digitally, we're using an identity provider, right? Whether that's the federal government or whoever we're getting, or Idemia, wherever you're getting your credentials through, and we're trusting that as a reliable source, that the source that's issuing those digital identities has done their proper work behind it, and if we trust those sources, that enables all sorts of online transactions with a high degree of trustworthiness.
And then Justin, same question over to you. What do you see as some of the benefits, and what value does a digital ID provide?
Yeah, I think that as Chris was mentioning, the high level of assurance, right, of that person is who they say they are. When you start to kind of layer different biometric attributes, biographic attributes, habits that a person has into kind of a picture, and you're able to do that without a friction. We're so used to now using kind of like a Face ID or using some other type of biometrics to unlock our devices. We're taking that to the next level by being able to use that as your face, and your kind of your essence is your identification, right? And so being able to do frictionless identity proofing, identity verification, being able to do that in high risk or high assurance transaction areas that you really want to, if it's banking sector or whatever, but being able to do that without having to pull out a driver's license and still get even a higher level of assurance than you would even with a document such as that.
So one of the other pieces that I've seen through my research about digital IDs, I think one of the other benefits is selective disclosure, and it's something that I don't necessarily want to share all of this information with the bartender at the bar. I don't want to give him my address, my eye color, my height, everything about me in that one ID. So Justin, what kind of technologies are currently being used, and what are you guys looking into as emerging technologies to facilitate that selective disclosure piece?
Yeah,
And some of the other pieces you hit on.
Yeah, and so people might not know that IDEMIA provides pretty much 40 or so of the state's systems of records for the state and local for the driver's licenses. So we actually print the cards, manage the system of records for those driver's licenses and DMVs. And in doing so, working with about 7 now states, and to be increasing that number up, but to actually provide the mobile driver's licenses, right? So if you go to Delaware and you have a driver's license, you can get a mobile driver's license. But to your point, Sam, is that now you can be able to pick and choose the attributes, right? So currently, right now, if you download that mobile driver's license from Delaware, you can go pick and say, when you go do an age verification, you're only doing maybe just a green checkbox that says that's been verified without actually ever sharing anything more to that, right? Because you can have a third party that's actually the state that actually becomes the intermediary that verifies the age, comes back, sends it to the relying party that's looking to it, and gives them a checkbox. And having that level of assurance of being able to talk directly back and forth to the system of record allows you to be able not having to worry about giving your address at a bar anymore. Unless you want to, anyway.
Yeah, they should start putting phone numbers on IDs. I think that would help at the bar a little bit.
Yep.
So what are some of the challenges that you guys are currently facing? Justin, I'll throw this question back to you, and then Chris, I have a follow-up for you afterwards. But Justin, what are some challenges that IDEMIA is facing as a whole, or just through the technology piece, really?
Yeah. So I mean, the whole ecosystem, right, is still kind of pretty new now that the standard has been solidified about what a mobile driver's license is. But in mobile IDs, even in a broader sense, might have different formats, shapes, sizes, and so on. And so that transaction we talked about, right? How do you enroll somebody? How do you create that credential? How do you create a set of attributes that you're going to share? And then when you read something, so our current issues right now is that there's not a lot of mobile driver's license readers out there, or even mobile identification readers right now, right? So enabling that to also just the kind of the hardware piece of it, we're providing that to like TSA and to other areas. So as you go through the TSA pre-check and checkpoints, being able to kind of ensure that friction, but expanding that to now banks and their branches and other places where you start to. But that's really the hardest part, right? Is being able to connect the relying parties to the person who is that has that mobile or driver's license or mobile identification card, and being able to ensure that transaction.
And then I just saw a really cool question come up in the chat that talks about what is really preventing the third party involved in the transaction from tracking your transactions and selling profiles and stuff like that. Are there any pieces in place, or is there any technology that we could leverage that would limit the tracking of that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's also policy, right? There has to be good policy around it. From a company standpoint, identity standpoint, we kind of focus on that we don't want to own any of the data, right? So as a trusted partner, as part of the DMVs or the system of records that we help to maintain, or passport systems or other international countries that we also maintain their national cards for, we don't actually ever touch the data, right? We help to facilitate the transaction, and after that, it's done, right? So kind of keeping to that process of that, owning data about an individual is not a business model that we want to be in, but it's something I think that from a policy standpoint really needs to become from an industry wide, because it's really not about understanding your attributes or your individual stuff. And there's some markets for that, but from our standpoint, we want to ensure the trusted foundation is provided between the individual and their authoritative source of where it is and the relying party.
And then, Chris, that was kind of my follow-up question with you. Is there any policy that you're aware of today that may outline some of the structure for digital identification or some of the ICAM stuff?
Well, you find it in government and industry, right? So I mean, in the government side, obviously, there's lots of NIST governance and documentation around it, and the whole ICAM body, pushing how these things should work, right? And then as far as what Justin was just talking about, people don't want to be necessarily the identity holders, right? You see so much of those folks relying on just in commercial industry, right? You go to a particular industry, they want you to use federate with your Amazon account or federate with your Google account, or those kinds of things, because they don't necessarily want your information. They just want you to be, they just want the assertion that you are somebody from a third party, so that they can do it, and they'll trust various third parties for that. And to me, I think Justin hit a lot of awesome points, in that while the technology is there, right, it's not the capability to use it is not necessarily spread out everywhere. And so it's a maturing, it's a growing. I think we'll probably see more standards get adopted across places to go help and help with that interoperability. But ultimately, you're trusting, right? Because if I have a third party that's asserting my identity, I need to trust that third party, right? So the integrity, the kinds of things that Justin was talking about with governance and processes, and having that level of integrity, so that you have that trust in your company or your government or your agency. I mean, I've seen government agencies that won't trust another government agency's identities, and they're all following the same processes, but they won't accept the PIP cards from another agency, even though by governance and by policy they're supposed to. So trust is a very, very strong thing, and I think you need that. That comes from reputation, that comes from auditable processes, procedures, and building out that trust in an entity, so that I can trust that, hey, this is Chris Laverne, and it actually is Chris Laverne. It's not, somebody else pretending to be Chris Laverne, because, without that sort of identity, we haven't really talked about identity proofing, but having that identity proofing built into that process, is really what, helps strengthen the whole process, right? And you've got to have that assurance in there. And the underlying technologies can be many things. That's why we put in something about blockchain. Sure, blockchains can hold identities as well. You just want to make sure you have the utility around it, and that you've got those third party integrations, so that you can use these things effectively wherever you need to in society.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, as I'm reading some of the other questions that came in, there was a nice question from Sandy Varsky that says, are there retention policies that affect digital ID and the use of those for consent logging? Now, to me, as somebody who's young and just still learning about digital ID, Sandy, do you want to refine that question a little bit? To me, I don't understand that, but Justin, would you be able to speak to that, or Sandy?
Well, let me try to refine it a little bit, because one of the things that always comes up is the trust factor of when you put something into a distributed ledger or something like that, such as an identification or anything else. And what we need to look at, obviously, is retention rules and policies. Those are often laws, but sometimes just policies. And how those, first look at those before we even look at whether or not we're afraid of quantum coming along and breaking something in an hour that might take 100 years for the current compute to decrypt. Does that make sense?
That's absolutely, that's a real risk. And when that moment comes, there's going to be a lot of clenching going on out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it sounded like you had a couple different parts of your question, but if I can understand it, though, is that, when you talk about a ledger system, right, the whole idea with, foundation trust or root of trust or certificate of trust, right, is that there's a source, a centralized source for those type of things that started with it, that would hold that and keep some type of record or some type of audit trail to it. Now, in a decentralized manner, how do you maintain that kind of auditability, that lineage, that transaction aspect to it? And there's different ways to do it, different blockchains that you can kind of tie to, different ledgers you can do, personal ledgers you can maintain and add different record retention pieces to it on top of it. But it really depends on kind of the use case, right? If you're deploying it at a, maybe at just kind of between a fantasy football league, and you just want to have some fun with it, and you want to just track winnings and losings and play it that way and start your own coin, then you can do that, right? But if you're talking about more of like state to state transactions or federal based transactions, there's of course all the rules and regulations to do it. When you kind of look at it, right, with the way Apple, Microsoft, and Google, they're all kind of trying to get into the federated space. As what we're trying to also provide is that way to provide a verifiable credential, which is that how do you actually can provide a decentralized credential to individuals, but still provide that high level of assurance, meaning do that identity proofing, identity verification. And there's a kind of an aspect, and Microsoft has a product for it. Apple is also working on theirs, but Microsoft has their verifiable credential that's part of this kind of ecosystem that actually runs on a blockchain ecosystem, right? And so being able to provide that, but what we also provide is that enrollment piece of it, right? That's really the first part of it, is how do you enroll into that identity, or get enrollment to be able to create that identity and then put that on as part of the blockchain for verification. And I just want to kind of hit on one point real quick, because somebody put in the chat, Google started out with do no evil, and they're one of the biggest ad markets in our ad providers in the world, and very true, right? And I think that, but from a technology standpoint, there's things that you can do to get away from that. And so we're looking at again, we don't want to own the keys for that, so we allow the states to own the keys to do that transaction, so we never actually get involved with that, right? And so there's ways like that to do. There's ways like homeomorphic encryption that we're looking at to be able to do searches and matches against encrypted data, and being able to never actually unencrypt data and still be able to match it in a verifiable way. And then, there's other ways that we're kind of, looking at technology to help to kind of ensure that we stay out of that business of trying to collect data.
Yeah, and that proofing is the hard part.
Yeah, and I will say, we are coming up on 10:30, so if people do have to drop for other meetings, we do appreciate you guys being here and able to listen to us and share some questions in the chat, as well as your opinions on different things and how you guys feel. I do have another question though that I'm curious about, that just came to my head. As we are an emerging technology COI, as we start to look at new technologies and how we're trying to implement them, we all have great ideas on how we can leverage it to make life better, to make the world a better place, right? For digital IDs, the trust of who a person is really comes from the government, or it used to. We have to rely very heavily on the government to say this person is who they say they are. So with new technologies coming out, who takes the first step here? Is this something that we wait for the government to release policy on, to say, hey, we would like this new technology to be used, or is this something that industry takes the lead on and policy follows?
Well, I mean, wait for the government. We could all be dead by then. obviously industry typically leads these things, right? Because the industry is going to be out in front of it, and from this, I mean, again, there's lots of ways to skin the cat, but I mean, the basics come down to a trustable level of identity proofing and a trustable level of authentication assurance, right? So you have those two pieces, right? A strong authenticator, strong identity. When you combine those, you've got it. There's many ways to do it. NIST has their ways. Other companies can have theirs. There's different ways, but it has to meet that level of trustability. It has to meet that level of utility, right? Because you could have an extremely, test all your body fluids, everything to figure out who you are, but that's not going to work in real life, right? Where we're not going to be able to do that. So you have to have an acceptable level of identity proofing. And then as far as your authenticator, right, you can, go full out and have the most quantum resistant algorithms available at this moment to try to proof your way into the future with the authenticator, but then your tokens are probably going to be cost prohibitive and the infrastructure to support it won't be there. So there's always that balance, right, of and I hate using the term, but good enough, right? It has to be good enough, trustworthy enough, secure enough, so that everyday life can continue, and it is a convenient thing, right? You lose all the convenience, you lose all these other things that uses its utility, and you've got, so there's always that balance, and industry is typically always the best at finding that sweet spot.
Yeah, and just to add, I mean, it's a partnership, right? I mean, standards cannot be made in a void. We spent a lot of time working with NIST and other government agencies and international communities, right, on the ISO 18013-5 for the mobile driver's license standard, right? And it finally got released, and now it's being adopted and being rolled out. But it took years upon years. But even before the adoption, right, we were developing hardware, we were engineering new algorithms to how to kind of create the wallet. And how to store that identity in a secured fashion, right? And so, I think that it has to go in parallel. I think, if you can't wait for policy or standards to come out, if you do that, you're going to miss the cycle of the R&D phase and the technology, insertion phase. And so, focusing kind of like, inserting, industry better into the kind of the standards process. I think it's always helpful, and that's what we've tried to do across, this whole entire mobile driver's license, mobile ID space, and even beyond into kind of next generation of how do you do biometric security. So,
amen.
Hey, Catherine, do I see your hand up?
Hey, yeah, I didn't want to interrupt, but hi, I'm Catherine Black. I work at Splunk, and I'm part of the associates program with Sam and the team. And thanks for letting us talk to you today. And Justin, you had just mentioned internationally with digital IDs. Would you be able to touch on kind of some of the differences of what we're doing in the US versus maybe like the EU, or how we've collaborated or information shared on the development of digital IDs?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? Some countries, like India, has a national card, right? And it's not bifurcated by state, where each state here has a different driver's license, and that driver's license ultimately has become an identification card, even though if you have an expired driver's license, it still can treat as an identification card, but you just can't drive, right? So it's kind of working in two fashions, where, in other countries, it's kind of, you have an identification card, and that is your overall ID, right? And so that helps to simplify the ecosystem and transactions. And so, I don't know if we'll ever get to a national ID, but having all 50 states being able to kind of hit back and validate that is the most important thing. And you see that in other countries, they have it in a centralized fashion. We kind of have it kind of, again, mixed bags, but that's why I think that, the more we can do to kind of help to build those standards, improve that kind of transaction piece of it, and be a part of how wallets are developed and how digital wallets are developed, and, readers are developed, so that we can kind of smooth over that ecosystem. But that's what makes it, I think, a lot easier in on the international communities, is just that unified ecosystem, from digital ID all the way to relying parties and hardware and readers.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. We do want to field some questions from the chat. I know this being a blockchain working group, do you guys have any blockchain questions? Justin, is that your wheelhouse, by the way? Are you familiar with blockchain? Is that something that Act-Iac is using in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, so I can't go into a lot of detail of it, but happy to kind of go in definitely side conversations into it. But as I mentioned, we're working with kind of big partners on helping to provide verifiable credentials, which is a way of which you can actually put decentralized IDs onto a blockchain, right? And using that as a form of being able to kind of reduce the burden on trying to go back to using the driver's license as that identification card, right? I think we'll always have that system of record, and we always will kind of go back to it from the United States standpoint, but on a larger global scale, there's areas where it doesn't always make sense to do that, right? So, we're working closely on that and kind of, building out a entire ecosystem for actually doing decentralized identification.
Nice. And I do want this to be informal. So in the next 5 minutes here, everybody can kind of come off mute and let's have a conversation about kind of what we learned today as well. But I do have one last question that kind of hits on the accessibility piece. So how would the adoption of digital IDs increase accessibility for people and make it easier in their lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the ability to be able to have a digital identity that's with you wherever you go, and do any type of transaction. If it's a bank transaction, if it's buying things at a store, or if it's going and doing going into age restricted areas. I think that type of ability to be able to move through that without having a lot of friction is important, right? And then I think it's even more important on the other side of it, because there's a lot of risk and fraud that puts businesses at risk and other things that can happen, and ensuring that transaction, right? So I think it helps both sides to, one, protect their identity, but also helps the other party to help to reduce their risk, and ultimately I think kind of provide a better product and service on that side.
Do you think it will ever displace having a hard card ID? Do you think that day will ever come, or no way?
I think that day will come when we no longer have to ever charge our phones.
Makes sense. Anybody else? Were there any questions in the chat that I didn't get to, or didn't get to read off that you guys wanted to have answered?
Hey, Sam. This
Hey,
is Mark.
Justin, I had a. Oh, go ahead.
Too. Marquise, I think you jumped off mute first, and then we'll pass it over to Drew.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's like hot button. I'm with Clinical Squared, and actually, I'm interested in what CGI is doing in this space, or kind of how you guys are thinking. I wondered if you could talk about some of the strategies, or if you've even kind of contrived any strategies about engaging community vis-a-vis like verifying entities to participate in credential verification, right? So there are a lot of systems that you're going to want to tie into to validate people's identity, and I think there's kind of like an exchange where you have to prove that your system is of merit for them to participate in, and so forth. So I wonder if you guys had any thinking around that. It's great to build technology, but if nobody uses it, if nobody participates in providing the services that make it go round, then you're just spinning your wheels.
So unfortunately, Chris had to drop, being our CGI advocate and him talking about some of the different things that we're doing. But Justin, I'm sure Act-Iac is doing a lot of stuff in this space. And would you be happy to take Marquise's question?
As I mentioned, like, we're powering 7 of the states right now, mobile driver's licenses, providing the wallet and providing the digital ID that goes with it. And I think that, as we start to roll that out, you'll see a larger adoption across other areas where you need mobile identification cards of some type, right? Already working, with different types of passports options, how you can also build that in, as well as working on the commercial side with different companies on how they can actually become a trusted partner, use the data that they have, and provide it as a identification, right? Being able to provide the different attributes they might have, or the different kind of information they might already store, and use that to help to kind of derive an identification or a credential out of it, right? Even working with large companies on the government and commercial space to actually provide their own corporate identification cards, right,
Yeah.
digitally. So being able to kind of work both ways. So the hardware is there. I mean, the technology is there. We provide, you know, the wallet, the credentialing enrollment process, as well as the readers on both sides, both physical hardware and mobile applications. And so, you know, I think it's just that it becomes a rollout that as more and more reliant parties and individuals start to have mobile identification cards, how they use them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is a bigger conversation. So I reached out to you guys on LinkedIn, and maybe we can have some offline kind of nerd outs about that concept, because building community, I think, is the overarching goal of all of this efficiency and technology. So thanks. Over.
Hey, Drew, I know you were trying to ask a question before. I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Sam. So hi, everybody. My name is Drew Osmar. I'm also part of the Associates 22 class. I'm a senior consultant with Booz Allen Hamilton. I do business development on their health account. So for someone who is not technical, right, you know, jumping back to the blockchain question, you know, I've done some research on it. I've read a couple books on it, kind of understanding the encryption and decryption factor of, you know, hashing the blocks together. Is that the main technological use case behind the potential of taking digital ID to the blockchain, or am I completely off on that? Just want to better understand it.
I understand your question. It's about what's the use case right now of putting a digital ID on a blockchain?
Or I guess the actual application of, you know, bringing it to the blockchain as a technology. Does that make sense? Not really.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
it does
But-
make sense. Can you hear me? Yeah, you
Yes,
might want
we
to and if you're not familiar in your readings in your education, Blockchain in Healthcare Today journal, which began in 2018, has been publishing articles on this topic for a number of years now. You know, it's an international publication, so you have efforts in Singapore, you have efforts all globally. I suggest you kind of pick out some of those articles or read them all. It's not that many years of article reading, because there's a lot of content there that you probably want to avail yourself to.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, and the kind of the applications we're looking at it from IDEMIA's standpoint is that by having a you know, a federated source of identity provider or identity verification providers that want to issue different kind of, we call it, again, verifiable credentials is the term. Microsoft has a product called Entra that pretty much allows you to roll that out. But again, it allows kind of companies to kind of control or individuals or communities, and again, and not just companies, but groups of individuals to kind of control that kind of decentralized nature of how they want to treat their identities, how they want to trust their identities, and so on. And so being able to provide that kind of flexibility of being able to create different communities of interest or practices or specialties around different things and use that, I think, is the real kind of you know, draw to it.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Hey, Eric, I see your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I noticed there, let's talk about one of these mobile identities. And I guess my concern is, have we thought about actually causing disenfranchisement for people that don't have mobile phones that are capable of displaying the mobile identities? I know there are times when I go to the Google Play Store, the Apple Store, and it says this program or this app is not compatible with your phone. And then there are also those people that there's an increasing movement toward the use of non-smartphones because people want to disengage from all of the social media, constant monitoring stuff. So there's organizations that move toward requiring a mobile ID rather than a physical ID could actually be disenfranchising people.
Yeah, no, hear you loud and clear. I mean, one of the things that we, you know, took on as a requirement for TSA was that, to that point, right, is the accessibility. If somebody does not have a phone, phone's dead, or they just, you know, are doing it different ways, which again, is why when you talk about it, it's really your biometrics or who you are, your identity, right? And being able to get to a space where you really don't need anything to be able to prove your identity and have that. And so, when you go through TSA PreCheck here shortly, you'll be able to pretty much use facial recognition, and that will be your identification, right? And so you won't actually have to ever present your phone or boarding pass, and you can provide a more frictionless approach to that verification process, right? So, I think there is a world that this is an intermediate step where we'll have mobile driver's licenses and mobile IDs. I think we'll get to another, phase of this where we start to have that ability to be able to use different biometrics technologies to kind of streamline that process.
Well, and on that aspect of the biometrics is, and I know you're going to say it's a policy issue, but many of us federal workers have our biometrics exposed due to the OPM data breach. And so if we go to a system where you're using biometrics and unless the person is physically present in front of you, then those biometrics can be faked, for lack of a better terminology. And so what are we thinking about in the ways of protection of people when breaches like the OPM breach occurs? Because currently, the last that I saw, most people's credit monitoring benefit has run out, and so now bad actors are free to go and use that data, and it's on the individual whose data was compromised to deal with anything that happens.
Yep. I mean, I'd love to talk to you more about some of the suites of technologies that we have to do that. But, the hardware that we build, the algorithms that we build on some of these biometrics readers have that type of tampering and security features that we actively look for and try to go off of that. If all your biometrics, your facial features and your fingerprints were all out there already, how can we still ensure a high level of assurance during a transaction? And that's ultimately what IDEMIA does as a company. So love to talk to you more if you have more detailed questions. I'd like to kind of focus in on some areas too.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, I do apologize. I do have to jump off, but I just want to thank you all and the group for their time. This has been awesome. So,
Justin, we appreciate it so much. Thank you for coming and speaking with us today. I think it was a great fireside chat, but good luck in the rest of your day, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Awesome. Yeah. And Josh, Jackie, thank you again. Cheers.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
Josh, I'll pass it over to you. Or Jackie, Josh. Let's go with Josh. Back
Josh,
over to you.
take it away. Yes, there you go,
All right.
Sam.
Hey, it was great to meet you folks, and it was wonderful to have you on the call today. And I want to sort of just pass it back to the chat. For our attendees, is there anything else that you feel bears mentioning or bears, sort of discussion or you would like to bring up before we let our folks, our colleagues who have presented to us today, before we let them off the hook? Speechless. Chat is speechless. Okay, so I'm certainly happy to end early today. Most of our meetings tend to go over, so it's nice to have one where I can give folks back a little bit of time before the AI meeting. So typically what happens at the end of these meetings, Sam et al., is I drop the link to our AI working group in chat, and I'm going to do that as well today. So if you or any of your colleagues have an interest in attending the AI working group meeting, please feel free to join the link. If you'd like a permanent invite or a recurring invite, then please send me an email. I'm going to put my email in the chat. And again, this was recorded. I'm actually going to stop the recording now. So